You probably have an image of Achilles as a savage, brutal hero who cares only for glory. Perhaps an inspiring image, but a barbaric one. Achilles is the relic of a more brutal past age. Yes, he was glorious, a great hero, but he lived in a society full of bloodshed and war, a society with a morality which we, modern Christians, liberals, could hardly understand. But those who read the Iliad might be surprised to find that it ends in mercy, with Achilles weeping with the father of his worst enemy. How could the Iliad, living proof of the barbarity and savagery of past pagan ages, end with mercy? How could it end with two men weeping together? How could this make any sense? It goes against everything which we're told. This is the symptom of a much broader issue. In the West today, we receive an almost entirely false view of history. This is a problem because how we view our history and our ancestors affects, of course, how we see ourselves. And one of the most widely spread false narratives about our history is that our pagan ancestors were brutal savages until they were civilized and gifted morality by Christianity or by modernity, by liberalism. This idea is popular among those who claim to be the most ardent defenders of traditional European civilization, like Jordan Peterson, for example. But it arises out of a lack of understanding of what the literature of the pagans, like the Iliad, really mean. And in this video, that is what I hope to explain. In these texts is an implicit morality, an implicit worldview, and implicit theology, which the modern reader often misses because we don't know to look for it. We're not taught to look for it. So in this video, I hope that I can reveal that to you. The Iliad is set within the broader narrative of the Trojan War. Paris, a prince of Troy, runs away with Helen, the wife of Menelaus, and therefore Menelaus's brother Agamemnon assembles an armada of Greek kings and sails to Troy to take Helen back and avenge the slighted honor of his brother. The actual Iliad begins with a violation of custom, the theft of a woman, which reflects the inception of the Trojan War. Agamemnon takes Achilles' beloved concubine, Briseis, for himself, slighting Achilles' honor. This leads to Achilles refusing to fight and eventually letting his dearest friend Patroclus wear his armor and fight in his place, a clear violation of honor, of custom, of everything which would be considered proper for a hero. This, of course, results in Patroclus' death at the hands of Hector. Achilles then enters into an animalistic, brutal, violent berserker frenzy in which he completely ignores custom. When he at last gets the best of Hector and Hector is on his knees, he asks to be buried in accordance with custom, with the custom of his people, of his ancestors, to have a proper burial befitting a hero. But Achilles says to Hector, "There are no pacts between lions and men, and there can be no peace between wolves and sheep." What exactly does this mean? Achilles is saying that in nature there is no custom or law, no pacts of peace, no mercy, no honoring the dead. Nature is a savage war of all against all in which there is no morality, no custom, no law. However, in the end, he gives in to the laws of Zeus, he gives into custom, and he returns Hector's body to his elderly father, Priam. So the plot of the Iliad is a violation of custom, which leads to Achilles entering a state of nature, the all-violent frenzy of nature where there is no law and custom, but then eventually a return to law, custom, order, all those things mandated by Zeus, by God. The same plot which we see in the Iliad on a micro scale, we see in the Odyssey on a macro scale. In the Odyssey, Odysseus is lost at sea and he encounters all sorts of savage peoples who violate custom and law, who violate Zeus's laws. Polyphemus the Cyclops is a perfect example of this. He is a savage barbarian who lives without law or agriculture, without any of the markers of civilization. And he says to Odysseus that he does not revere the laws of Zeus, and when Odysseus and his men show up as Polyphemus' guests and invoke Zeus's hospitality laws, Polyphemus promptly cannibalizes them, which of course is the worst possible violation of the sacred laws of hospitality. And this sort of stuff happens again and again throughout the Odyssey. Meanwhile, while Odysseus is at sea, outside the boundaries of civilization in the state of nature, at home, All of the men of Ithaca are staying at his household, trying to marry his wife and devouring his wealth. They are literally devouring Odysseus' household and his well-being. Eventually, Odysseus returns home and restores order with the help of Athena. So what can we see from all of this? These texts are rooted in an understanding of nature as all-devouring. In nature, on the most basic level, everything is trying to eat everything else. And implicit in this understanding of nature as all-devouring is an understanding of biological life as something which, on the most fundamental level, whether it's a tree, whether it's a person, an animal, seeks growth and therefore must consume. Both trees and men, as they strive for the sky, for growth, for excellence, must by necessity consume and compete. There are limited resources to consume, after all. So the very nature of life, which is to grow, by necessity requires consumption and competition. Achilles refusing Hector his burial rites, Polyphemus eating his guests, the suitors eating up the wealth of Odysseus' household. These are all examples of what happens in the absence of custom, when custom and law, which make up civilization, are violated, and the all-devouring state of nature reemerges. Law and custom arrange society in its proper order, so that the lesser do not rule the better, and the higher do not abuse the lower. As Nietzsche pointed out, in nature, the strong are as vulnerable to the weak as the weak are vulnerable to the strong. The lamb is vulnerable to the lion, but the lion is also vulnerable to parasites. The gods mediate between this savage world of nature and the world of civilization. And these sacred laws, which stem from Zeus, the Sky Father, the divine arbiter of justice, are constantly tested and violated throughout the Iliad and Odyssey. But these tests, these violations, are an affirmation of these laws. They show why they are necessary. They teach us about how the world works, how nature works, and why we need custom, law, morality, personal virtue within civilization. So now you should understand a little bit better what the Iliad and the Odyssey are about. They have an implicit moral worldview within them, one which becomes quite obvious once you see it. Of course, there's a lot more to it than what I just outlined, but it's way too much to get into here. That's why I created my heroic literature course, where I go through these texts in detail, breaking down each scene and doing multiple episodes on the Iliad, on the Odyssey, and soon on the Norse sagas. So if you want a really detailed breakdown of these texts, go check that out. But to really understand what these texts are about, what the Iliad, what the Odyssey, what the Norse sagas are about, we actually have to zoom out and understand the European pagan worldview more broadly. These texts don't just have an implicit morality within them, they also have an implicit theology within them, which that morality is based in. The chief god of the Indo-Europeans was the Sky Father. We know him as Zeus, Jupiter, but his name in the language of the Indo-Europeans would have literally meant daylight father. The supreme god in the religion of our ancestors, therefore, was the daylight sky, and he had a son, Striker, who was the master of thunder and lightning, who we know as Perun or Thor. Thor, of course, literally means thunder, and his hammer, Mjolnir, means lightning in Norse. These deities make perfect sense for a people who are living a nomadic life on the open plain, on the Russian steppe, where the sky would have been the most prominent and the most threatening feature. We also know that the dawn goddess was a prominent deity for the Indo-Europeans, and that the sun was female. The sun is still grammatically female in many Indo-European languages like German. Okay, so we know about these three gods, the Sky Father, his son, the Thunder, the Striker, and the Dawn Goddess, who may have also been associated with the sun. But what can this little bit of reconstructed information tell us about their religion? It can actually tell us a lot, and in combination with texts like the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Norse sagas, I think this can tell us everything we need to know. How is that possible? Well, let's break it down. Hold tight. The path of the hero follows the sun. The hero descends into the chaos both of his passions and of the natural world of all-devouring nature, before he reemerges into the light of justice and law. Thinkers like Karl Jung do a wonderful job of explaining this archetype, the archetype of the dying and rising hero, or the descent into the underworld. The hero overcomes the natural forces without the natural world and masters the natural forces within, his instincts, his nature, and he reorders them and orients them towards the divine. And what is the divine? The divine is the sky, the daylight father, who represents, as we saw in the Iliad and Odyssey, justice, order, harmony, supreme excellence, also nobility, glory. In both the Iliad and the Odyssey, we see a descent into the chaos of all-devouring nature, like we talked about, before there is a return to reason and custom, again represented by the gods, by Zeus, and by Athena. In the Odyssey, Odysseus summons the dead to ask for advice. He summons the dead seer, the prophet Tiresias, and Tiresias tells Odysseus that he can only return home swiftly if he and his crew can restrain their desires and not devour the cattle of Helios, the sun god, when they are starving. They get shipwrecked on Helios' island, and of course, what do? They become hungry and they devour this cattle. Again, we see another violation of custom in the form of devouring. As a result of this, all of Odysseus' men are killed. When Odysseus finally does return home, he has learned restraint, and he uses it to plot his revenge upon the suitors and restore order to his lands, again with the help of Athena. In the Iliad, it is Athena who grabs Achilles by the hair and holds him back, restrains him, when he reaches for his sword to cut down Agamemnon. Ultimately, of course, Achilles learns to restrain his own pride and his own wrath, and to submit to custom, to submit to the laws of the Sky Father. Now, this is the same symbolic arc which would have taken place in the Choreos ritual. The Choreos ritual is entirely speculative. It's reconstructed by scholars based on cultural evidence, based on common motifs, myths, archetypes in all European pagan cultures. In this ritual, the youths of a tribe would have been expelled into the wilderness, into nature, where they take on the symbolic form of wolves, living lawlessly like animals before returning to civilization, having mastered and incorporated the wolf within, the all-devouring appetites, the instincts. Now, we of course don't know whether this actually existed as a ritual, but we have examples of this archetypal journey of the youthful hero into the wilderness, where he takes on the literal or symbolic form of a wolf, all throughout different European pagan cultures. Romulus and Remus are an example of this. Their father was deposed by his brother, and they were sent into the wilderness to die, where they were suckled by a wolf. They then returned to their father's kingdom, killed his brother, the usurper, and restored their father to his proper place. They then went off to found their own civilization, their own city, which is Rome. We can find another example in the saga of the Volsungs. Volsung, the father of Sigmund, is betrayed and killed. All of Sigmund's brothers are also killed, but he is saved by his sister, where he lives in the wilderness. Sigmund and his son Sinfjotli are living in the woods, again in the wilderness, outside of civilization, while they prepare to take vengeance on the killer of Volsung, while they prepare again to restore order, to restore justice. But during this time, they find magical wolfskins which transform them into wolves, and as wolves they spend time running around lawlessly murdering travelers. But ultimately they burn the wolfskins. Becoming the wolf and entering the ecstatic, all-devouring frenzy of nature is an initiative stage. It is through this ritual that one encounters, embodies, and wrestles with, and ultimately masters one's own nature, as well as nature more generally. It is this all-devouring, violent element of nature and human nature which the berserker warriors tap into when they go into their berserker frenzies in battle. Okay, so let's zoom out again. What exactly is going on here? We have the Sky Father, the source of order and justice. We have a conception of nature as all-devouring, and then we have the path of the hero, which mimics the path of the sun, descending into the all-devouring, violent, chaotic state of nature before returning to order and ultimately achieving glory, achieving the light of glory, which emanates from the Sky Father. So with the help of this more zoomed out perspective, we can see that the root of Indo-European and European pagan theology is the struggle of order against chaos. Chaos here is conceived of as death, decay, disharmony, ugliness, and the violent, all-devouring aspects of both nature, the natural world, and human nature. Order, in contrast, is harmony, beauty, excellence, glory the creative aspects of nature and ultimately life itself. The hero wages war on chaos, within and without, and seeks to order nature, again both within and without, into a hierarchy where excellence, life at its highest potential, beautiful, radiant, death-defiant, like the Sky Father, is at the top. And the fact that God dwells in the sky is very important. The struggle between order and chaos is manifest in the very workings of biological life. Each season and each generation, life is continually reborn, reconstituted, reordered out of chaos and out of death, just as the sun is reborn each day out of the darkness of night. Okay, now we're starting to see what's going on here. When we look to nature, we see that all biological organisms are bound by death. Whether that's plants, animals, or men, every living creature is bound by death. Yet through the miracle of reproduction, somehow, each season and each generation, life is born again out of death, and the chain of being continues. Life perpetually reorders itself in spite of the entropic, chaotic forces of the universe. Through passing on the flame of life which his ancestors passed to him, and with it their traditions, and through his own heroic action which will be sung down the generations, and through the glory which these actions win himself, his ancestors, and his descendants, man can claim a type of immortality. This is the meaning of the myth of Persephone. Just as the Indo-European dawn goddess goes beneath the earth each night, causing the death of the daylight, Persephone goes into the earth each season, causing the death of vegetative life of plants on earth. But each day at dawn, the daylight returns, and each spring, life is reborn out of the earth and reaches towards the sky, resurrected by the sun, just as a new generation of men who strive for excellence are born each year from the womb. The divine rests in the sky because there is the source of nourishment for life, the sun, which literally draws the plants out of the earth, out of the house of death. You'll notice that plants and flowers close up at night, but when the sunlight hits them, the light of the Sky Father hits them, in the morning they open up again. It is into the earth, literally, that living things return when they die, and it is out of the earth that plants grow when they are reborn again in the spring. Life is continually reborn out of the earth and strives upwards and towards the sky, towards God, the Divine Father, in spite of gravity, which in this kind of spatial metaphor denotes the spirit of entropy, the spirit of leveling and dissolution, because it pulls life back towards the earth, back towards death. This is why Nietzsche said, "Let us kill the spirit of gravity." It is gravity which life literally resists, which plants resist as they strive towards the sky. And it is entropy, dissolution, which life resists in maintaining its own internal structure when it grows. So this makes the order versus chaos motif a lot more clear. Order in the Indo-European conception does not denote rigidity, but rather the element within the world which moves towards harmony and structure, the ultimate expression of which is biological life. Life forms structures seemingly out of nothingness and strives violently and dynamically to expand, to grow, to increase itself, and miraculously manages to evade death through reproduction and the continual regeneration and rebirth of its structure. Life is that which generates structure out of chaos. Life is that which strives towards the sky, towards the light, towards the divine. And this is at the heart of European pagan and Indo-European theology. Now, you may have noticed that there are also echoes of all of this in Christianity, but the fundamental metaphysic of Christianity is very different and finds its origins in Zoroastrianism. With Zoroastrianism, a kind of civil war took place in Indo-European theology. Zoroastrianism began to move away from the Indo-European conception of order versus chaos, a very kind of physical, biological conception, and towards a more dualistic cosmology of moral good versus moral evil. And this transition was completed in Christianity. This is why Nietzsche chose Zarathustra as his prophet to reverse this transition. In Zoroastrianism, good will ultimately triumph over and destroy evil, restoring the world to its former state of perfection from which it has fallen. And additionally, the virtuous dead will be raised and receive eternal life. This probably sounds familiar. This theology made its way into Europe via Christianity, which is really an amalgamation of a lot of different threads. First of all, the Near Eastern fall from nature narrative, which we see in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and of course in Genesis. The idea of the judgment of the dead and heaven as an oasis, seen in Egyptian religion. The previously mentioned Zoroastrian elements, which were likely also influenced by all of these former things I mentioned. And of course the ritual language of the Greek and Roman mystery cults. So there's a lot of overlap here, but there's also a huge theological break between Christianity and the other monotheistic religions and the European pagan and Indo-European religions. Unlike in Zoroastrianism, in European pagan theology, the cyclical struggle between order and chaos can never have a final resolution. One can never triumph over the other since they are inseparably linked. If the dead are raised and granted eternal life, for example, then there can never be any new life again. As death is destroyed, so is birth, and the sacred chain of ancestry is halted forever. Again, life needs to consume in order to grow. You cannot remove this all-devouring element from nature and from human nature without completely destroying and nullifying life and all that is good and beautiful in life, all that strives for beauty and for the divine. In the Norse religion, serpents gnaw at the root of Yggdrasil, and surrounding the world is the serpent Jormungandr, waiting to clash with Thor during Ragnarok. The wolf Fenrir waits in chains to devour Odin, and each day one wolf chases the sun across the sky while another chases the moon each night. Order and chaos, life and dissolution, striving and leveling are in a constant cosmic struggle where one cannot finally triumph over the other. However, there's an important caveat to this, one which the Iliad and Odyssey are trying to teach us. In the struggle between order and chaos, one principle can, quote-unquote, be on top in the hierarchy of being. Again, it is the daylight father, the source of order and the upholder of laws and customs, who lives in the sky and towards which plants reach for light and men reach for fame and glory, the eternal light of fame and glory. Zeus, God, is the goal of all life, representing the ultimate source of life, light, order, justice, nobility, and excellence. And life is correctly ordered when he is on top, when he is ruling from the heavens and ordering all-devouring nature and chaos. The Carthaginian religion seems to have been a kind of inversion of this, with the all-devouring aspect of nature as the highest god. Archaeology seems to have confirmed that the Carthaginians, who were related to the Phoenicians and Canaanites, sacrificed children to their gods. The Greeks, Romans, and Israelites all accused this group of related peoples of child sacrifice. While viscerally horrific, this practice is not necessarily illogical if one starts from a superficial observation of the natural world. If nature is all-devouring, then perhaps the innocent must be sacrificed to appease nature's endless hunger. But this is not the European pagan conception. In Greek mythology, Zeus overthrows Kronos, who is literally devouring his children, and Theseus kills the Minotaur, stopping the yearly sacrifice of Athenian youths to this bullman. If we really want to speculate, we might even say that these myths could reflect an encounter with and overthrow of a Phoenician or Canaanite practice of child sacrifice to their bull gods El and Baal. Of course, that's highly speculative, but either way, in both the myth of Kronos and Theseus, the cycle of child devouring is stopped, and order, justice, and law are imposed by the youthful hero. And this is a common motif throughout European pagan myths. The hero dethrones the all-devouring, destructive aspect of nature, which devours life as soon as it is born, and establishes the divine order, securing the chain of ancestral being and allowing life to strive towards excellence unimpeded. Again, death is necessary for life. Things are properly ordered when the old generation gives way for the new one, when plants inevitably die and give way to new growth, not when the old generation devours the new one, when life devours itself and the ancestral chain of being then devours itself. Odysseus finally restores order to his kingdom when he returns home, and he, his son, and his father all don armor to fight together, 3 generations together. Thus his sacred kingship, his his ancestral chain is secured. And of course, we also refer colloquially to this ancestral chain of being as a tree, a family tree. In the saga of the Volsungs, there is literally a family tree in the center of his hall, into which Odin thrusts a sword. In European pagan theology, the cosmic tree represents the sacred cosmic order. Again, we see this most clearly with Yggdrasil in the Norse religion. And again, this is a natural metaphor. At the roots of Yggdrasil are the serpents, which represent the all-devouring aspect of nature. Why are they at the roots? Because the roots are where a tree consumes. It takes in nutrients from its roots. And then, of course, those nutrients are brought up the trunk, and the tree then reaches, strives, grows towards the sky. It reaches its branches towards the heavens, towards the divine. So a tree itself represents life correctly ordered, with the consumptive, devouring aspect feeding the growing, striving aspect. I think the serpent is chose to represent all-devouring nature. One, because a serpent sometimes will eat its own tail. This actually happens in nature. It will eat itself, which again represents this kind of all-devouring aspect of nature, with life devouring itself, right? But also because the serpent lies in wait to strike you and poison you, which can kind of be similar to this all-devouring aspect of nature in civilization, right? Human nature, the kind of negative element of human nature, can sneak out and strike at you any moment, causing tragedy, as we see in all of these European pagan myths. And also just the all-devouring chaotic element of nature can erupt from beneath civilization at any time. This part of nature is always lying in wait to cause chaos. The individual, the hero, should mirror this sacred cosmic structure in his own being. Those who are ruled by the passions, by the lower impulses like hunger and lust, those who cannot master their nature, bring on their own destruction, just as Odysseus' crew did when they devoured the cattle of the sun, and just as the suitors did when they devoured Odysseus' livestock. In both cases, they could not restrain their appetites, and it led to their deaths. But what is needed for the hero is not a denial of the instincts, but rather proper restraint, discipline, and direction in their expression. Again, the all-devouring element of human nature should feed the element which seeks glory and growth, just as the roots of the tree feed the branches which strive for the sky. The body reaches its most beautiful, powerful, and effective form through the discipline and direction of training. And just so, the hero uses virtue and reason to discipline and channel his nature towards excellence, and thus he wins the eternal daylight of glory. And all of this is contained implicitly within the Iliad and the Odyssey. After his time at sea experiencing the chaos of the world without custom and law, the chaos of nature outside of civilization, Odysseus learns to restrain his own nature and returns home to restore order and justice to his kingdom, and to restore the ancestral chain of being, to reunite with his father and his son. In the Iliad, as we've talked about, Achilles follows a similar journey. However, the Iliad does not necessarily end in peace because it's halfway through a war, but it does end with Achilles returning the body of a son to a father. Again, this theme of ancestry, of the proper chain of being, even though it is a dead son. And the Iliad ends in a truce, in peace, a temporary peace, albeit, but a truce. Again, we see all of this in the Norse sagas. Sigmund and Sinfjotli live in the woods. They take on the forms of wolves, but eventually they return to avenge the death of Sigmund's father, to again restore the proper ancestral chain of being, the proper cosmic order, and to restore law and custom. All of these things are connected, and they all reflect each other, from the level of the individual to the family tree to the cosmic tree. So I hope from all of this, I've shown you that in the heroic literature of our ancestors, there is a theologically and morally complex worldview, one which is so complex that it actually maps onto what we know about the nature of biology, physics, and evolution. There was never an Eden on Earth. Life was born from chaos, from a thunderous storm of gases and lightning, from a churning ocean. And since then, 4 billion years ago, there have been between 1 and 4 billion species on this planet, all struggling against death, against entropy, against extinction, in a savage war of all against all. There was no paradise without death and suffering at the beginning of time. Death and life, consumption and growth, order and chaos are inextricably linked. We have the fossils of these animals, these species, which lived for millions of years before us. We can see their teeth, their claws, immortalized in stone. And we too are part of this grand struggle of life, the order-generating principle against entropy and dissolution, the principle of chaos. What makes man unique among the other animals is his ability to order his own instincts and to order nature and to direct it towards the divine. No other animal can do this. All other animals live in the natural state of the war of all against all. All other animals are subservient to their instincts. They cannot direct and order them. Just as life represents the ultimate ordering principle of the universe, man is the ultimate ordering animal. If we shun this role, we either end up in the all-devouring state of nature, a total war of all against all, our civilizations break down, or we withdraw from the horror of life and condemn it as evil, search out a utopian paradise, which is just as destructive. Both of these paths lead to hell, and our ancestors knew this. They knew that the only correct path is to strive relentlessly for excellence, which means submitting the lower to the higher, just as the son of the Sky Father strikes down the serpent of chaos. And they knew that this path required a character which was relentless, hard, and harsh, unyielding in the pursuit of honor, glory, and excellence. When Volsung refuses to flee from the ambush which has been treacherously laid out for him, he says, "I swore in the womb to never flee from iron or fire." He is uncompromising in his adherence to his higher nature. He would sooner die than lose the principle of honor which orders his very being. There is not a glimmer in his heart of the lesser impulses which would have him flee and avoid a confrontation with death. For it is in showing weakness that the serpent of chaos, always waiting for its moment to strike and poison the limbs, slips in. And I fear that in forgetting the worldview of our ancestors, we have let this serpent take hold of us. We have let it poison our bodies and our societies, slowly but surely, without us even knowing it. We have forgotten the cosmic order and our role in it. We have forgotten our ancestors and their customs. We have forgotten the ancestral chain of being, and this forgetting is our great poison. Even if you are a Christian or an atheist, if you do not understand your ancestors and their worldview, you cannot understand yourself. And if you are not in contact with their spirit, you lose the most divine part of yourself, that part which is eternal, which year on year, generation upon generation, has been born again and again out of the misty darkness of death.
If you're interested in learning about the worldview of the ancient pagan cultures of Europe, the ARC's Heroic Literature course is linked in the description. Thank you for your support.